Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to explore one of the most unexpected and strategically significant developments in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, and that is how Ukraine managed to manufacture a fuel crisis inside Russia. On the surface, it may seem strange that one of the world's largest oil and gas producers could be facing shortages and disruptions within its own borders. But when you look deeper into the strategies and tactics that were used, the picture becomes much clearer. This is not simply about explosions or battlefield clashes. This is about a carefully designed plan that targeted Russia's most critical industry, its energy sector, and exposed vulnerabilities that the world never thought possible. At first glance, Russia has always appeared like an energy giant. For decades, its image has been tied to oil and gas, not only as a backbone of its economy, but also as a powerful tool of political influence. The entire world knew Russia as one of the top fuel exporters, and Moscow used this advantage to pressure its neighbors, to negotiate with global powers, and to fund its massive military. From the exterior, Russia projected strength and dominance, showing off refineries, pipelines, and an energy network that seemed too vast to fail. But Ukraine, instead of being intimidated by this huge machine, studied it, looked for weaknesses, and began poking holes in the armor. The exterior image of Russia as an unshakable fuel giant began to fade as cracks started to appear, especially when targeted strikes showed that even the largest producer in the world could be destabilized. Inside the operation, Ukraine's approach was not about brute force. It was about precision, timing, and creativity. Rather than trying to destroy every piece of infrastructure, Ukraine used drones, sabotage, and strategic attacks on specific facilities like oil depots, pipelines, and refineries. These targets may look small compared to Russia's entire energy network, but each one played a vital role in keeping the system running smoothly. By disabling or damaging these points, Ukraine created blockages that disrupted the entire flow. The interior mechanics of Russia's fuel supply system began to show how fragile it really was when placed under stress. The short but effective attacks exposed the reality that the system was not as indestructible as Russia liked to present it. In fact, it was vulnerable to relatively low-cost tactics that Ukraine was able to deploy with surprising effectiveness. When we think about performance, this is where the results became visible not only inside Russia, but also to the rest of the world. Russia suddenly found itself dealing with shortages of fuel in regions that had never faced such issues before. Reports started to surface about rising fuel prices at local stations, long lines of cars waiting to fill up, and disruptions to industries that relied on steady supplies. This performance drop was not just an inconvenience, it had far-reaching consequences. The Russian military, which depends heavily on fuel for trucks, tanks, and aircraft, began feeling the strain as logistics became harder to manage. The economy, which thrives on the ability to export energy while also providing cheap domestic supply, started to wobble as the balance was thrown off. What had been a smoothly running engine turned into one sputtering under pressure, and for a country that relies so heavily on energy for both war and peace, the performance hit was enormous. Russia did not simply stand by as this was happening. It tried to activate safety features to protect itself from further disruption. Anti-drone defenses were set up around key facilities, security was tightened, and emergency measures were rolled out to stabilize the domestic fuel market. Moscow also tried to limit the export of fuel in order to keep more supply within its borders, a move that sent ripples across global markets. But despite these defensive measures, the effectiveness was mixed at best. Ukrainian strikes continued, drones kept slipping through the protective nets, and the domestic problems did not go away. These safety features were not enough to guarantee stability, and in many cases they only highlighted how difficult it was for Russia to defend against a persistent and creative opponent that understood how to exploit weaknesses. The most remarkable part of this story is Ukraine's unique selling point in this strategy. Ukraine does not have the same level of resources as Russia. It cannot outproduce or outspend its larger neighbor. But what Ukraine does have is ingenuity, adaptability, and the determination to use every tool available in unconventional ways. The use of drones not as a mass destruction weapon, but as a precise instrument of disruption, showed the world that wars today are not only fought on the front lines, but also deep inside the economic heart of a nation. Ukraine's unique approach made this crisis more than just a military victory. It was a psychological and economic one as well. By showing that Russia could be shaken in its own backyard, Ukraine demonstrated that size and resources are not the only factors that decide outcomes in modern conflicts. The price of this manufactured crisis is heavy for Russia. On the financial side, the government has had to spend billions trying to patch up the damage, stabilize markets, and reassure its citizens. Rising domestic prices have angered ordinary Russians, creating dissatisfaction that the government has struggled to contain. Export restrictions have also meant losing valuable revenue from international buyers, especially at a time when the war effort requires constant funding. Beyond money, however, the real cost is in credibility. Russia has long built its reputation as an energy superpower that can not only supply its own people, but also dominate global markets. Now, that reputation is being questioned as images of fuel shortages and reports of rising prices circulate around the world. For Ukraine, the price of these operations was far smaller, but the payoff was massive, as the effects reverberated far beyond what anyone could have imagined. When you put all of this together, the conclusion becomes clear. Ukraine manufactured a crisis that turned Russia's greatest strength into a point of vulnerability. By striking at energy, Kiev didn't just cause temporary disruptions. It forced Russia to reveal weaknesses that had been hidden behind decades of propaganda about strength and stability. This is more than a short-term battle. It's a shift in how modern conflicts are fought. Instead of only focusing on territory or military clashes, Ukraine showed that targeting the backbone of an economy can be just as powerful, if not more so. The fuel crisis inside Russia is not only about empty gas stations or damaged refineries. It's about the psychological blow of proving that even a giant can stumble, and that clever strategy can balance out overwhelming power. The story is still unfolding, and it will continue to shape how both Russia and Ukraine move forward. But one thing is already certain. The world has witnessed a turning point where innovation and creativity in strategy managed to expose and exploit the vulnerabilities of a much larger adversary. The fuel crisis is a reminder that strength is not only measured in numbers or resources, but in the ability to adapt, to innovate, and to strike where it matters most. Ukraine has managed to do that, and in doing so, it has reshaped the conflict in ways that will be remembered for years to come.